we do have quite an audience here, Arlie.
Yeah. So, is it sign-in sheet or anything?
Oh, yeah. Is John in charge of all that? For the?
We are sharing responsibility.
Oh, there's, okay. There's John.
So,
I don't know if we're...
Hi. I fractured my radius. He was there in the aftermath. Yeah, apparently there was. But it's okay. It's not a severe fracture, you know, just some time.
she'll never play the violin again.
Never. Sob. Karaoke.
All right, so should we...
Oh, we're on the thing now.
Oh, yeah, so I should probably talk.
Okay.
You ready?
Sure.
All right, welcome to our Friday seminar. Today we have two of our own PhD students here at PSU going to talk about green streets and active aging. So without further ado, Arlie, Adkins, and Gretchen, Luhr.
Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today we're going to be... Thank you. Today we're going to be talking to you about green streets and the implications of these physical infrastructure features for active transportation and active aging. And I'm Gretchen Luhr, doctoral student in urban studies, and to my right here is Arlie Adkins, also a doctoral student in urban studies. We'd also like to acknowledge Drs. Jennifer Dill, who's not here with us today, and Dr. Margaret Neal, who are the two PIs on the project, as well as Professor Dr. Vivek Chandas and Darren Lund, who is a graduate of the School of Community Health. So a bit of an overview of what we will do today. First, we'll discuss with you, what are green streets? What our research questions were for this project, our study design and methods, some of our key findings, and some conclusions, implications of this research. So what are green streets? Here you can see some different types of green streets as evidence from these pictures around Portland. They are basically planter boxes that are designed to catch stormwater runoff. And they have assorted varieties of plants. And you can see them in the form of swales, curb extensions, just planter boxes, other varieties. So this image here was a before and an after, and this just explains. This is a little design schematic of what they did to change this segment. So some of the environmental benefits are the recycling or the recharging of groundwater. They increase the tree canopy. It rehabilitates the soils, so it replenishes it with moisture and nutrients. To some extent, they beautify the neighborhood. More greenery, to a certain extent, is beautiful. And also, it cleans and cools the urban air. As in urban environments, there is that chance of the urban heat island effect. And they do filter pollutants. And our questions are, well, what are the benefits of these in terms of transportation? And, also, what is the benefit in terms of aging? And really, these two questions are very much intertwined in that active transportation, the use of, alternative modes of transportation as a bicyclist, as a pedestrian, someone who uses mass transit, that does actually have long-term benefits in terms of our own aging process. So our research questions for this project, this was an EPA, Environmental Protection Agency funded project to demonstrate the actually effects of these green streets. And our questions for this project were, are residents living near green streets more physically active in their neighborhoods? Do residents living near green streets interact with their neighbors more and demonstrate higher levels of neighborhood social capital? What are the residents' opinions of these green streets? And are there variations by age or other demographic characteristics in individuals' responses to these green streets? We had 3 additional questions that we may get to if we have time today. Does the implementation process, the implementation of these green streets and the design affect the green street outcomes in terms of the success and the favorability in the neighborhood? Do green streets affect home values? And how do green streets affect stormwater flows, mitigate urban heat islands, and improve carbon sequestration rates in the Portland neighborhoods? Okay. So a bit about our study design, and please go ahead and stop me if you have any questions as I'm speaking. We wanted to compare neighborhoods with and without green street treatments. So we selected 4 areas in the Lentz neighborhood that we were defining as a neighborhood. 2 of these areas within the Lentz neighborhood served as our treatment neighborhoods. And we'll get to that in just a second. And we had two matched controls. As part of our data collection efforts, we conducted walkability audits, and I'll get to those in a minute. We conducted a household survey to residents within the area. We also conducted an environmental assessment and a hedonic pricing assessment. So a bit about our...
Hedonic pricing assessment means?
Sure. Can you speak to that, Arlie?
Yeah, so basically what we did for that, and this we may get to this at the end if we have time, but very briefly we looked at home sales data in East Portland over I think a 2-year period, and using regression analysis, we were able, you can put in all the different attributes and the characteristics of the household and the neighborhood, and then try to isolate any effects that the green streets are actually having on the home prices.
All right. So these little green spots here on the map reflect our 2 treatment areas. And what we're calling our neighborhoods had to meet the following criteria: that they had to have at least 10 green street treatments over a 5-block area, that the land use be primarily residential, that it be in an existing neighborhood. And then we selected, as I said earlier, we selected 2 controls, one around here and one around here. I think we may have another image. And these were matched based on socio-demographic characteristics and approximate geographic area. So here is a depiction of the Green Street area and its control along the west side of I-205, which divides our study area. The green reflects the actual location of the green streets, and you can see the areas look relatively comparable. They're similar. Next. And then this is the what we're calling the 104th Green Street area and its control. And this is on the east side of I-205, and again, also very similar. And the streets, there seemed to be a random mixture of both paved and unpaved, and streets with sidewalks and streets without sidewalks in this area. They're still undergoing quite a bit of development out there. So the walkability audit, I'm sure that many of you in the room are familiar with various kind of pedestrian audits of urban environments. We utilized, actually, an audit developed by Kelly Clifton. It was the Pedestrian Environment Data Scan, and we utilized her instrument and also an instrument developed by Yvonne Michael, who was at OHSU, who's now at Drexel, and hers is the Senior Walking Environmental Assessment Tool. We took aspects of both of those instruments and combined them to create our audit. An audit is basically a physical inventory of characteristics that we expected to have an effect on pedestrian behavior. And there were various kind of themes throughout this audit. We looked at kind of land use, we looked at the pedestrian environment, we looked at the streets, we looked at also kind of aesthetics and things that maybe are more subjective that may have implications for walking. And what was unique about this audit is that we actually involved older adults, 60 years of age and older, to help us with the data collection process. So we had 12 older adult volunteers in addition to myself and Arlie and Darren. We all conducted the audits together. We did a reliability assessment on 10% of the audits, and so they did show overall relatively high reliability. Some items, some of the more subjective items, such as the sense to which the streets felt enclosed, or the sense to which people perceive houses or yards to be maintained. There was not as much reliability there. So as I said, we had 12 volunteers. They engaged in a 4-hour in-class training where we went through the entirety of the instrument. We gave examples and opportunities to practice. We also had a 4-hour field training. And after that, we set everyone loose. In total, we conducted 380 street segment audits in and around our study area. And this is just a really quick example of what we can do, just at least descriptively, with some of the audit data. This is our 90-second treatment area. And basically what I would just like to illustrate here is that the green color versus the red color, people tended to like to walk, or the segment felt safe for walking on areas where there were green streets. And around this area. So it just basically illustrates, just descriptively, that this area, with the green streets, were more attractive to pedestrians. Yeah. Yeah.
So did you ask people about all the different street segments?
Yes, we had at the end of the audit instrument, all the raters were asked to rate whether it felt safe or whether it was attractive for walking. We had 4 items. And we had ratings for each. We rated each segment.
But I mean, people in the neighborhood.
Excuse me. Can you the microphone in front of you? If you just push the button so the audience online can hear.
Thing at the bottom says touch.
Okay.
So I'm just wondering whether all the people in each area were asked about all the different segments as opposed to just asked about the segment on which they lived.
Oh, okay. I think I understand your question. So were the residents of the neighborhood asked about every segment rather than just the one that they live on? Okay. So let me clarify. These ratings were made by the auditors. Those were conducted by the graduate students and the older adult volunteers. We did have a separate component of this project that we will describe in a little bit, where we had, in the survey that we sent to all households, we had a map of each study area based on where people lived, and we asked them to rate streets that they liked and did not like. And so I think that may get more to the question that you're asking about, and we'll get to that in a little bit. Okay, so the survey methodology, we did 4 mailings. We did a pre-letter to let people know about the survey that would be coming to them in the mail. We did send a survey packet to each of the households within our study areas, and that each packet had 2 surveys. So we were trying to maximize our household response rate. We did do a reminder postcard, and then we sent out a second packet to households. And households had the option to call and request additional surveys. We, in fact, did have one household in where 5 adults did complete a survey. So we mailed out initially 2,462 surveys. 299 were returned because it was undeliverable or the house was vacant. And this resulted, though, in a 26.4 household response rate, which we were very pleased with. Anecdotally, from the Lentz Neighborhood Association, we were told, you're not probably going to get more than a 10% response rate. Well, clearly, we exceeded everyone's expectations. And for a mailed survey, this actually is not too bad. So in total, we had 748 surveys across 572 households. And we looked at the demographic kind of profile of our survey respondents, and this was actually very similar to our kind of socio-demographic profile of the study areas as a whole. And between 16 and 27% of our respondents in this, for this study were 65 years of age and older. And we had people into their 90s who completed this survey.
Okay, so now I'll get into our findings. I guess, are there any questions before we move on about any of the methods that we used? Can also ask about them later. Okay. So now we'll just sort of go the 6 main questions that we had. We'll just go through those one by one. One result of having both the survey and this audit of the walking environment is that we have a lot of data that we've been sifting through. So I apologize if the next few slides are a little number heavy. But please ask questions as I go if you have them, if you want anything clarified. So the first question, are residents living near green streets more physically active in their neighborhoods? The indicators that we looked at for this were the frequency of walking trips to various destinations as reported on the survey, and then self-reported changes in walking behavior over a period of time from before the green street installations were put in to the present time when the survey was being conducted. So here, looking at walking behavior, this is walking to any type of destination within the neighborhood. You can see here, so we're comparing the 92nd Green Street area to the control area, and just how these, the next few slides are going to be set up. If it's in green, that means that we found a statistically significant difference between the treatment area and the control area, the Green Street area and the control area. So here, there in the 92nd areas, there were more people reporting that they walk to any destination in their neighborhood more than 5 or more times per week, and the average number of times per month was also higher. And then you'll see that in the 104th area, while those numbers are higher in the Green Street area, the difference was not statistically significant. We also did a regression analysis to try and find out what differences might be attributable to the difference in whether someone lives in a Green Street area or in a control area, controlling for some of these other demographic and attitude differences. So even controlling for these other things, we did find that living in the 92nd Green Street area, people were more likely to walk more there, and that was not significant for the 104th Green Street area. We asked a series of questions about people's behavior in either 2006 or 2007. So depending on the Green Street area, this was just before the installation of the Green Streets. So we weren't asking about Green Streets. We were just giving people a point in time to try and remember back. Obviously, there are some issues with recall here and how accurate that's going to be, but we decided to move ahead despite those limitations. And what we found, so this is the question, compared to the time before the Green Street was put in, I walk more in my neighborhood now. In both cases, people were more likely to agree with this in the Green Street area. The only one that is statistically significant, however, is the 104th Green Street area. And also when these were combined, when we just looked at both Green Street areas and both controls together, there was a statistically significant difference.
Okay, so the second question we asked was, do residents living near green streets interact with neighbors more and demonstrate higher levels of social capital? And we had 2 indicators to help answer this question. The first was about the sense to which people felt their neighborhood was socially cohesive. And the second item series of items we asked were the different types of social interactions people may have with their neighbors. So what you can see here, these were the different social interaction items, which could be also combined to form a scale. Those bolded in green is where we found statistically significant differences between the Green Street areas combined together and the controls. And you can see that these were much more kind of informal, kind of passive. I see you on the street and I'm waving to you. Though that was more significant in the Green Street areas, and perhaps this is because they're out on the street more. Some of the more kind of formal, intimate ties, those were not significantly different. There were not significantly different. There wasn't variability in terms of the social cohesion variables, however.
Okay, and continue our little tag team here. So then we also asked a series of questions trying to get at what the residents think about these green streets. So for this, we looked at people's perceptions of changes in the neighborhood since 2006 or 2007, people's opinions of the green streets themselves. So at this point, we did ask them specifically, green streets, and the description of a green street was actually in the question we were asking. And then we also used a mapping exercise that was in the survey to get at attractiveness for walking on each individual segment. So here looking at changes in the area, and again, remember this is from the time before the Green Street went in to the time the survey was conducted. In both the 92nd and the 104th Green Street area, people noticed there were more trees, there were more bushes and other vegetation. They noticed more sidewalks, more street lights, and more paved streets than in the control areas. Also, people noticed more children playing outside, and some of the others are a little bit more mixed. So, changes in the area before and after the Green Street installation. There were, in the Green Street areas, people were more likely to say that my neighborhood is now a better place to live, as well as to say that walking in my neighborhood is now more pleasant. And as you'd expect, people did say that trees and other greenery have increased. We also wanted to look at some of the potentially negative perceptions of green streets. When we were out talking in the neighborhood to residents, and when we were at the neighborhood association, we did hear some complaints and things that we wanted to test. So these were the questions that we asked to try and get at that. Some pretty smaller numbers for these negatives, but we did. The only one that is statistically significant from the Green Street area to the control area is that driving is now more difficult. We did hear quite a few complaints because these indentations are put in, these planter containers are put in where someone might want to, often they extend out into the street as a curb extension, so any number of reasons that people might perceive these as being more difficult to walk. In a lot of cases, the streets were completely reconfigured, so the driving area became smaller. So we don't exactly know what's going on here, but it is worth noting. As far as awareness of the green streets, 77% had noticed them. And this is across the entire study area, so even people living in a neighborhood that doesn't have or in an area that doesn't have a lot of these, and again, all within the Lintz neighborhood, but they might be 10 blocks away from these concentrations of green streets. So we think that this is a pretty sizable chunk of the neighborhood is aware of these, and 64% of those who were aware of them also knew the purpose of why these are being put in by the city. As far as opinions of the green streets, these are, just comparing the 92nd Green Street area to the 104th Green Street area, people tend, I won't read all of these to you, but I think it's telling that 65% and 59% say that these green streets make their neighborhood a better place to live. And I will add that this is where we switched to actually explicitly asking people about the green street. So it was no longer just giving them a date in the past. We were asking them specifically about the impact that they felt these green streets had on their neighborhood. So I think some evidence here that people do attribute these to having some positive impacts on their neighborhood. And again, some of these negatives that we also looked at explicitly in regard to people's associations with the green streets. And again, smaller numbers here for the negatives, but I think these do show that sort of the design and outreach are important for satisfaction with these. So we mentioned this before, but this was the map component of the survey. Respondents were given a one-page map of roughly the area, the study area, so that they lived in. And they were asked to sort of draw lines where they do walk regularly, to mark an X on street segments that they do not like to walk on, and a circle on ones where they do like to walk. So this gives us, as far as where people are walking, the thickness of this line. It's a little bit hard to see some of the fainter ones, but the thickness of the line shows where more people are walking. And these are just sort of, it's a graduated line. This is just to give you some reference points for what the thicknesses mean. We were also able, for each segment, based on these ratings, we were able to come up with a sort of an average, or rather a percentage of positive ratings for that segment. So you can see the blue lines are a positive rating, and the yellow lines are negative. And if I can get this pointer to work. One second. So one thing that I want to point out here, so this is 92nd Avenue, and these are all sort of geographically laid out here. Right in here, there's a series of Green Street installations. Other than that, the street is roughly the same as 92nd down here, the main difference being that there are not green streets. So this suggested to us that there might be something going on with these green streets and people's perception of attractiveness for walking. But we'll get to that in a second, but you got a question.
So all four of these areas...
Oh, and if you could push the button. Thanks.
All four of the areas in question are entirely residential. There's no business. I'm wondering about the purpose of the walking, whether it's just to get a walk or maybe go walk to visit a neighbor, or whether there's any purpose to go to the convenience store or whatever.
For this component of the survey, we didn't care what the purpose was. This could be out walking your dog. This could be any number of, it could be going to the store, recreation.
What I'm saying is that if there were businesses that would buy us the routes because people would walk more to certain locations.
Yes, and we would expect that there would be patterns based on that. People, so this is, I want to say this is Holgate. People walk on that a lot. They don't necessarily like walking on it. So it's, people are attracted to where there are services. So yes, that is definitely part of this. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so based on this map data and these sort of the score that we were able to assign for each segment, we did basically looked at all the correlations between the different physical attributes of the street segment from the audit data. I'm going to get some water before I can't talk anymore. And the attractiveness for walking. So we we had all these correlations. We used a statistical software to sort of, as a first step, throw everything that had a correlation in to see what the computer spit out as a model for explaining attractiveness for each segment. And you'll see down here that controlling for all these other things that were important, green streets did come out as a significant predictor of whether or not a segment was rated as attractive. Then we wanted to kind of isolate some of the vast variation within this neighborhood. So this model is looking specifically at 92nd Avenue. Where I pointed on the map before, there did seem to be something going on with the green streets. So we wanted to control for some of these elements that are maybe part of a green street installation. The sidewalks being set back further from the curb, the curb extensions, and landscape buffers. Because it would be otherwise very easy to say, okay, people like walking where the green streets are, but that's only because it's providing a buffer, because it's providing a curb extension. So this shows us that at least along 92nd, there is something about the green street itself that's having an impact. At least that's what we're reading into this here. And a fairly high, 0.6 adjusted R-square value.
So our next question that we wanted to explore was whether there was variation across our study areas by age, another demographic characteristics and responses to the green streets. Arlie?
Sorry, I'm taking a break.
Oh, okay. So we dichotomized this. We did ask year of birth, and from there we were able to compute age relative to the date that we actually implemented the survey. But we did dichotomize this to be under 65 and 65 and older. And we asked the percent that they agreed that the green streets made their neighborhood a better place to live. And you can see that those, and while the green suggests that there is a statistically significant difference, this is not, I don't think we should discount that this was important to people 65 years of age and older. But they make walking in the neighborhood more pleasant, that they improve the amount of trees and other plants, and that they see children playing outside more. Of course, that's less, but still more. And I think what's really also very important to highlight, while these are not significantly different from one another, 65 and under, or under 65 and 65 and older, you do see that there actually was an increase in people walking more. And bicycling more and driving less. And I think it's just interesting to note that while there isn't a difference between those under 65 and those 65 and older, nearly a third reported increased walking behavior. You can also see that among those 65 and older, and that range is from 65 into the 90s, 90 years of age and older, that they do feel that older adults do feel that it makes parking on the street more difficult, that it makes driving more difficult, and not an insignificant number really think that it makes getting in and out of their car difficult. So we also wanted to look to see just walking behavior, differences by age, and this is merely for just descriptive purposes. We did not test to see if there were meaningful differences between the groups here. But we did ask the number of times that they walked in their neighborhood. In the Green Street treatment area, those they tended to walk more, whether they were 65 and older or under 65, with those 64 and under walking more. Next. Also, here was the percent of walking one time per week or more. And in the Green Street area, they tended to walk more than in the control. And the 104th Green Street versus the control were relatively similar in their patterns.
And if I can interject,
Yeah.
one thing to focus on here, I think, is the relative difference between the 92nd Green Street and the 92nd control. Again, I don't think we did a statistical test on that, but visually you can just start to see a bit of a difference.
Thanks, Arlie.
But it's not there in the 104th areas.
Okay, so we're just going to wrap up with some really kind of quick conclusions and then open it up to any questions and discussion that you may want to engage in. So what we have found, there is some evidence of more walking in areas with the green streets versus without the green streets, and especially around the 92nd Avenue corridor. Residents of green streets are more likely to report walking in 2010 versus 2006, so that suggests there has been a change in walking behavior. And there is some evidence of more on-the-street social interaction in the Green Street areas versus the non-Green Street areas. And nearly 1/3 of older adults, reported that green streets resulted in their walking more. And this was roughly the same as for those under the age of 65. And is there anything that you would like to add, Arlie, in conclusion?
Yeah, I think only that, like I said, we collected a great deal of data on this, and we're still continuing to go through it. And I think there are some age-related differences that we haven't probed as much as we would like to. So that will be an ongoing process as we move forward. So I know that there wasn't a great deal of discussion about, maybe as much as some of you would have liked, about older adults, but we're working on that.
And thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you. And we do have time for questions. So.
Remember to use your mic.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the study you did kind of analysis of you picked 2006 as a year, as before and after, and before and now. Did you look at anything having to do with like pre-recession, post-recession, any correlation with gas prices, just people not able to afford to drive and are walking as a result of that? Any look into that kind of information?
No.
Yeah, that's not something we control for. That's a really good point, though, because there were some major differences that happened. The survey went out in
May of 2010.
2009, 2010.
2010.
2010, yes.
2010, for the record.
I know, yes. So that's an excellent point.
One question that we did ask people if they felt they had enough money to get by, but that's not really pre and post recession, but we can probably factor that in somewhere.
Yeah, right behind.
It seemed like when there was a difference between the 92nd and 104th sites, that 92nd was coming out ahead, and I'm wondering if you could speculate as to what the differences are between those two regions that made them.
Yeah, one thing that we probably should have included in here was more of a description and some photos of the green streets themselves in these areas. Along 92nd, it is a busier arterial, whereas 104th is more of a residential location. The Green Street treatments near 104th are very basic. Basically, it looks kind of like a grass parking strip that's slightly indented. It has some trees in it. On 92nd, it's more of what we saw some of the pictures of where it's the concrete basin with various plants in it, grasses. And actually, we do have.
Also, we should note that along 92nd also versus 104th is that Lentz Park is also along 92nd Avenue, and that is a destination for a lot of people.
Yes. So here you can see this is one of the 104th Green Streets. So if you weren't looking really close, you might just think, oh, that's a normal parking strip there. So that could definitely have something to do with the difference.
I guess so.
Two things. One, you mentioned that some of the older adults said that they felt that some of the Green Street treatments made it harder for them to get in and out of the car.
Yeah.
And I know that certainly as I've looked at the green streets around the city, there are several different designs.
Yeah.
And some designs perhaps would versus would not prevent, say, an older couple where, one member of the couple is the driver and the other member is a pedestrian that's maybe using some sort of mobility device, like a cane or wheelchair or walker. Some of the designs would not prevent the passenger from getting out of the car easily, whereas some designs certainly would.
Yes.
And I was wondering if in your study you sort of looked at differences in design in that respect.
We did not, but that's a really good point. I mean, and some do have kind of pavement in which you can get in and out. But The ones along 92nd, we didn't actually control for the variation in design, but the ones along 92nd have they're the deep basins in which if you did have to park along there, it would be challenging to get in and out of your car. Less so here, but pointing that out, that's a really good point.
So that was the part A question. The part
Yeah.
B
And
question-
actually, if I could,
Oh,
one little, it was kind of implicit in the study because 92nd were sort of all one type and 104th were all one type. So some of those differences, like we were talking about before, could be design related. And there's a great photo that we took out here, and again, I wish I had it in the presentation, where somebody had taken a sheet of plywood,
that's right. I forgot
And-
about that.
bridged the indentation there. So.
Especially with bioswales, I've noticed some of them will have a grading over it where, someone
Yeah.
could walk across it, and some are just like the ditch.
Yeah.
You could-
Yeah.
Oh, but the part B about the question was that there was an article published by North Carolina State University in which they talked about some of the street treatments that were supposed to be, transit-oriented or pedestrian-friendly for older adults or people with mobility impairments, actually resulting in promoting a design of housing that was not friendly to older adults and to people with disabilities. And I know that you said that in a next iteration of the study, you were sort of looking at whether or not green streets have an effect on housing price. I was wondering if you were thinking about as well looking at whether or not green streets have an effect on housing design.
That's, we did not look at that. And in fact, in the pricing assessment that we did, we were only looking at single family homes. So no, but that.
I guess what I'm saying is once a green street is in place and a developer sees this and sees this as a positive thing, sort of what type of housing then
Yeah.
ends up going on?
Yeah, and one thing that we wanted to do here was look at neighborhoods that were built out, that existing neighborhoods, and a lot of these green streets, because they're now required with certain kinds of development, are going in newer infill projects or newer neighborhoods. So there's definitely potential to ask those sorts of questions.
It's the infill projects specifically that end up being non-older adult friendly and
Okay. Yeah, and that would we couldn't do that with our data, but that's an interesting question.
Any other questions?
I'm sorry, I missed the earlier part of your presentation, but I do wonder, getting back to your question about destinations within the community and the 2006 versus 2010, the opening of the Green Line, also transit service. I believe there's transit service on Holgate out this far.
Yes.
As well as Foster. And so, again, those destinations and how those factor in to people's choice on what streets they're walking on.
Yeah, and that's something we thought about quite a bit in picking our control neighborhoods, because we knew that there had been some major changes in these areas. So we, in both cases, we tried to pick controls that had similar transit service, or similarly situated to the new MAX stations, so that when we were doing the comparison between the two, that would kind of be taken into account. And as far as the kind of like the question we had earlier about the destinations, that is, we did ask a lot of more questions about specific destinations. For this presentation, we sort of lumped everything together, but that is one of those areas that we can dig a little bit further with.
But one thing that we can't really tease apart was the reasons why people were walking. So we can't really say whether they were, walking merely for leisure or if it was for some utilitarian purpose, walking as a means of just mere transport because of no other alternative. So we were not able to distinguish, though, in terms of like going to destinations and such, why they were walking necessarily.
Well, only for the map.
Only for the map
component. For the self-reported sort of number of times per month, we do have all that by destination and type.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at your photos, and in one of them there's a street with no sidewalks.
Yes.
And so did you find any correlations between the streets? Because that seems like a just a residential street and might actually be, that it would be pleasant to walk on, even nicer than the ones with sidewalks. And so I'm wondering if you saw any correlations between that too.
We didn't, and that you bring up a really interesting point, because when we were doing some of the modeling with the map data, oftentimes things that you would associate with being good for pedestrians, they would have a negative coefficient, a negative influence on attractiveness. And I think that's largely due to these are going in places that are not good for pedestrians to try and make it better. So it's really hard to tease apart that difference. And yeah, like sidewalks, presence of sidewalks didn't come up in a lot of those models for exactly the reason you're talking about. If it's a quiet street, people don't feel like they need them.
And even in the open-ended responses in our surveys, many neighborhood residents said they would prefer not to have the sidewalks added to their streets or to even have streets paved. And I think it could have something to do with the fact that it would actually probably increase traffic down their street. I think they were actually more or less content with the way things were.
Yeah.
So in both cases, your survey area is considerably larger than the area with the actual Green Street treatments. Are you able to sort of establish if there's sort of a halo of a given distance around a treatment that actually has a benefit?
We did some of the analysis. I don't think any of it ended up in this presentation. Was looking at people who lived on a Green Street or a segment with Green Street treatments versus not. But no, we haven't done sort of look to see how far the benefits might extend. I suspect that with the data we have, it would be really hard to. I mean, our numbers would start to be so small in the a ring around it that it would be hard to do. But maybe more of in a descriptive way, we could get at that. So that's a good suggestion. Yeah.
In some of your tables that you had before, when you're looking at the percent of people agreeing that green streets make walking more pleasant, the 65 and older category had like 50% that agree. What were the other 50%? Were they disagreeing, indifferent?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
They could. We did give them, I think for most of them, we did have a no opinion option. Margaret, do you recall?
I don't think we did. I think it was a
Okay, so
4 or 5 point scale.
Okay,
yeah.
okay. So yeah, so they were disagreeing. But not necessarily saying it made things worse, just not that it didn't make things better.
And that's such.
Oh yeah, and this is Margaret Neal, one of the PIs on the project.
That's also a pretty simplistic way to look at age differences, because it's not controlling for ability or previous walking behavior, or, anything like that. So that's a very rough cut at looking at age differences.
Right.
Yes, and we have more time, so we'd love more questions. Yeah.
I'll press that. Here's my question. You said you were going to probe additional age-related differences. What are you looking at?
That's a really good question, Cheryl.
So one area where we haven't done that at all is with the map
data.
Attractiveness ratings, and I would love to do more with that to see if there are differences. It's quite an undertaking to do it in a statistically appropriate way. So that's the hang up at this point. But
and other analyses that we can do, we can intersect the age with, we can look at it, stratify it by functional ability, by self-rated health. So we can control for other health factors. We do have some health data. And also we would just like to do some more refined regression analysis involving age and perceptions of the neighborhood and walking behavior. And my own research will involve some of this data looking at age differences. Yeah.
Sadie in the back, and then we'll come up.
I'm assuming that tenure may have something to do with it, but I'm interested in why you chose Lentz as your community of focus and not another cluster of green streets within the city.
Yeah. We chose lengths just by virtue of the sheer number of Green Street treatments. We did have a map from the Bureau of Environmental Services where we were able to look at all the Green Street installations within a certain amount of time, and the Lentz neighborhood had the most. There were some more kind of spotty ones, that, like we had that the criteria that we listed earlier, and so there was at least 5 within a certain block radius. So that's actually why we selected Lentz. I mean, certainly if we had more time and money, it would actually have been interesting to do comparisons to other neighborhoods with Green Street installations as well. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Regarding the question about do you walk more since, or rather from 2006 to present, I'm wondering if any of the Green Street treatments actually included sidewalk improvements or creating new sidewalks where previously they did not exist.
Yes. Yeah, that was the case in a number of the 104th areas. Sidewalks and, in fact, like paving the street were put in. So that is, I'm glad you brought that up, because that is sort of a caveat, especially in that area, with some of the findings. And that was, one of the reasons that we felt we had to ask explicitly about the green streets themselves. So it couldn't just be asking people in a way that's not associated with green streets. So, you're right.
I'm curious how these interact with on-street parking, and I'm trying to remember these neighborhoods, but it's been a while since I've been out there. Do you have a sense of what proportion of the residential units there are using on-street parking, and how that?
Can you speak to that?
There's very on-street parking was one of the items in the walkability audit. Just from my observation, without looking at those numbers, 92nd has very little on-street parking. 104th has a lot of it. They also have a lot of, most of the houses have driveways and garages. But that wasn't something, based on the audit data, that wasn't something that was coming up as significant in any of our models.
I have a question from one of our viewers who's watching this over the web.
Oh, wow.
Hello.
Viewer asks, why was the study data only divided between the population of under 65 and over 65? And would it have been more useful if you divided it into smaller age groups?
Good question. We divided it 65 and older and under 65. I think if we had divided it into smaller age groups, we would have had insufficient ends. The samples would have been too small to detect meaningful differences.
But there may be some opportunities to look at it more as like a continuous scale in some of the upcoming analysis.
Right.
With the green streets, it has a lot to do with, the border between the street and the residences. But were there any changes in either the roads with like bike markings or stop signs or speed limits or anything like that that went along with the green street improvements that might affect the greater environment?
I believe that on 92nd there were bike lanes, striped bike lanes put in at the same time. And we did ask some questions about the environment for bicycling, but we haven't really touched that for our analysis yet. Got a few more minutes if anybody has anything else. So, oh, wow.
Go ahead.
Can you speak to, and this is probably a more general question, to those kind of street improvements, because they're publicly owned parcels of land, but is there any maintenance that's going to go along with them? I know in the picture along the first or at the beginning of the slide, it was a pretty elaborate landscaping. And is there any planning towards just the ability to upkeep that, or is it just kind of a self-contained environment?
So what we've learned from the Bureau of Environmental Services, and if anyone is here that knows more about this, please feel free to chime in. I think it's BES for a period of, I want to say, 2 years after these are put in, has regularly scheduled maintenance. After that, the maintaining these transfers to someone else, maybe. Well, so there is some, like, if there's a problem with one of these, like something breaks or it's not draining properly, there's some other bureau that is responsible for that. But like the sort of day-to-day upkeep is the responsibility of the property owner.
Mm-hmm. You have a question?
In the beginning, and which type of place would need this data to say, hey, everyone loves it, give me money and let's do some more? Like, which agencies would be liking that everybody likes it?
Probably
not agency, money source.
Well,
Next, because obviously the money came from somewhere. So, was that BES?
I think it was BES.
Mm-hmm. So they want to do more, right?
I think. I mean, then they are. I mean, throughout Portland.
Yeah. Does it come from taxes or what?
I'm not entirely sure of the funding mechanism.
It's about money, so obviously everything's about money.
Probably, and there's probably.
Well, so a lot of these are put in at the expense, not so much in these neighborhoods, but a lot of them are put in at the expense of a property developer. But because these are in existing neighborhoods, it was some funding for stormwater management facilities was used for these. Okay, well, if there are no more questions, thank you so much.
Thank you. Great audience.
Thanks. And I'm going to put in a plug for next week. Our final seminar is our own Alex Bagazzi talking about his master's thesis, and he makes the argument that we should be divorcing air quality improvements from congestion alleviation measures. So see you next week.
Nice job.
Thanks.